My name card was gone. In its place sat a woman I had never seen before, wearing my grandmother Ruth's silver necklace, the one my mother claimed had disappeared after the funeral. Dad raised his glass while 20 relatives watched me stand there holding the Thanksgiving dinner I had paid for. "Mara," he said, "it's time you accepted the truth. Rebecca is my biological daughter. You were adopted." My brother Andrew pushed a document toward the empty place where my plate should have been. "Sign it," he said. "Then the orchard stays with the real family." The heading said, "Beneficiary Disclaimer." I photographed every page, picked up my coat, and left without giving them the scene they had prepared for. At 11:47 that night, Rebecca appeared outside my apartment crying so hard she could barely speak. She placed an old photograph in my hand. It showed my mother at 17, holding a newborn. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were 6 words: Elaine and baby Rebecca. September 1987. Then Mom texted me, "Don't listen to her. Come home now." My name is Mara Quinn. I'm 36 years old and I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I arrived at my parents' farmhouse carrying 2 insulated bags and a bakery box. Mom had asked me to order Thanksgiving dinner because Andrew's restaurant was too overwhelmed to help. I had spent $600 without mentioning it. Through the dining room doorway, I saw 12 polished place settings, Grandma Ruth's china, and 1 missing chair. Mine. Mom accepted the food without thanking me. A woman sat beside Dad in the place I had occupied since childhood. She appeared close to my age, with careful brown hair and both hands folded tightly in her lap. Around her neck hung Grandma Ruth's antique silver pendant. Mom had told me it vanished while the funeral guests were still inside the house. The stranger touched it nervously when she noticed me staring. Mom crossed the room and placed one hand on the woman's shoulder. "Mara, this is Rebecca Quinn." The woman corrected her quietly. "Sloan. My name is Rebecca Sloan." Mom's smile tightened for half a second. I noticed because my job involved noticing corrections people wished they had not made. Rebecca had not joined our family legally, yet someone had already written Rebecca Quinn on my old place card. Dad did not invite me to sit. He raised his wine glass while Andrew closed the dining room doors behind me. "Rebecca is my biological daughter," Dad announced. "She was born before your mother and I married." Then he looked directly at me. "You were adopted after your birth mother abandoned you. We protected you from that truth." No one at the table looked surprised. They had rehearsed this without me. Andrew pulled out the missing chair but did not offer it to me. Instead, he placed a document where my dinner plate should have been. "It's only a family acknowledgement," he said. "It prevents arguments over Grandma's orchard." I read the first paragraph. It identified me as a potential beneficiary and required me to surrender any present or future interest in 74 acres of Quinn family land. Mom carried Grandma Ruth's leather photo album to Rebecca and called it "The History She Was Denied." I had spent years repairing those pages after Ruth died. Now the first 6 sheets were gone, the ones containing my hospital bracelet, Dad holding me as a newborn, and Mom visibly pregnant. Rebecca traced an empty binding strip and asked, "Were pictures removed?" Mom answered before I could. "Only duplicates." Rebecca turned to me with something close to apology. "David wrote that he called his daughter's little star." My stomach tightened. Dad had used that nickname only when I was very young, before Elaine told him it sounded childish. I asked Rebecca when she received those letters. Dad said they had been lost years ago. Rebecca frowned. "Elaine collected them from me this afternoon for safekeeping." Andrew stood to make a toast. He spoke about healing old wounds, restoring bloodlines, and letting truth replace obligation. That final word landed exactly where he intended. I had managed Dad's medical bills, refinanced Andrew's restaurant debt, and handled Mom's insurance appeal. Yet in one sentence, my entire life had been reduced to a burden they had nobly endured. Rebecca lowered her glass without drinking. I refused to sign. Dad's expression hardened. He said a developer had offered enough money to secure everyone's future, and the orchard sale would proceed whether I cooperated or not. Andrew added that the closing papers were already being prepared. When I asked for the deadline, he answered too quickly. Monday morning. Thanksgiving had not been a reunion. It was pressure before a 48-hour clock expired. I photographed every page of the disclaimer while Mom accused me of humiliating Rebecca. Then I photographed the altered album, Rebecca's place card, and the necklace clasp. Inside the silver pendant, barely visible, was Grandma Ruth's engraved handwriting. For Mara, when the truth is needed. I put on my coat and left. Behind me, Rebecca asked, "Why would Ruth put Mara's name inside my necklace?" At 11:47, someone knocked 3 times on my apartment door. Rebecca stood in the hallway without Grandma Ruth's necklace, her mascara streaked and her coat unbuttoned. She said Andrew had cornered our parents after I left. Through the pantry door she heard him say, "Once both women sign, neither one can come back for anything." Then she handed me a weathered envelope and asked to come inside. The first photograph showed my mother at 17, sitting on the steps of a brick building with a newborn against her chest. Elaine looked frightened, but unmistakably young and alive. On the back, in handwriting I had seen on every birthday card of my childhood, were the words, "Elaine and baby Rebecca, St. Agnes Home, September 1987. Rebecca had been told Elaine was a maternity home employee. A second picture showed Dad standing beside a visibly pregnant Elaine outside the Orchard farmhouse. A processing stamp dated it 8 months before I was born. Rebecca said her adoptive mother had hidden both photographs inside a sewing box. Before she died, she gave Rebecca one warning. Do not trust the man claiming to be your father. Find the daughter they kept. Until Thanksgiving, Rebecca believed that daughter was stealing her life. Elaine had contacted Rebecca 6 months earlier through a genealogy website. She introduced herself only as David's wife and claimed Dad had searched privately for decades. According to Elaine, fear of scandal kept him away. Rebecca showed me hundreds of messages filled with apologies, family memories, and details from my childhood. My mother had not simply found her. She had studied exactly what Rebecca needed to hear. Rebecca admitted she arrived believing I knew I was adopted and had deliberately kept Dad's real daughter away from the orchard. My parents sent her photographs of my house, my job, and Andrew's restaurant, presenting my ordinary life as proof I had benefited from her absence. I told her they had warned me for years about a disturbed woman who might someday appear and demand family property. What would you do? Trust the stranger at your door or the parents who had raised you? Share your answer, and subscribe to Before She Spoke Stories. Rebecca opened a screenshot Elaine had called proof. It showed Rebecca and Andrew as a close family match, with enough shared DNA to suggest siblings, but it did not identify which parent connected them. Dad had never tested. The account belonged to Andrew, and only cropped portions of the results were visible. Rebecca whispered, "They said this proved David was my father." It proved nothing of the kind. I drew 3 names on a legal pad: Elaine, David, and Andrew. Andrew was unquestionably Elaine's son. If Rebecca was also Elaine's child, their DNA connection would look exactly like the screenshot. Rebecca stared at the diagram, then at her photograph. She had Elaine's narrow chin and the same small notch in her left eyebrow. Neither of us had noticed because we had been instructed to search for Dad. Rebecca still had one supposed letter from David. Elaine had missed it when collecting the others. The envelope was postmarked only 4 months earlier, not decades ago, and the return address belonged to a mailbox store near my parents' house. Inside, Dad called Rebecca Little Star and described an orchard memory copied almost word for word from my childhood album. Someone had manufactured a father for her using my past. My phone began ringing. Mom called 7 times, then sent one message. Don't listen to her. Come home, right now. Rebecca's phone received something different. Elaine wrote, Mara is trained to manipulate government records. She will manufacture anything to keep the orchard. The messages arrived within the same minute. Mom was not trying to reconcile us. She was managing 2 separate stories before we could compare them. Using the same public procedures available to any Pennsylvania resident, I requested my certified birth record and searched the county adoption index. No adoption case appeared under my name, either sealed or open. My certificate named David and Elaine Quinn as my parents. But one detail disturbed me more than the absence of adoption papers. The certificate had been reissued when I was 6 years old. The Records Office released the amendment supporting my reissued certificate. Aunt Judith, Mom's older sister and a retired notary, had submitted an affidavit claiming my original birth record contained clerical errors. But the changes did not replace my parents' names. They removed a hospital reference number and sealed the supporting file. Someone had altered the paper trail without creating an adoption. I searched every county index connected to my childhood name, birth date, and parents. There was no petition, agency placement, final decree, or amended adoption record. Legally, I had never been adopted. My parents had repeated the story so often that I mistook familiarity for proof. Rebecca watched me close the final database and said, "They didn't hide your adoption. They invented it." An old insurance file gave us the next contradiction. When Dad added me to the family medical plan, he identified me as his natural child. His signature appeared at the bottom beside the date. He had completed that form 5 years after the supposed adoption. Either he had committed insurance fraud for no reason, or he had always known I was biologically his. I remembered Grandma Ruth standing in the orchard when I was 12. She pressed soil into my palm and said, "Whatever they call you, this land knows whose child you are." Mom later told me Ruth was becoming confused. Now the sentence sounded less like sentiment and more like warning. Ruth had known someone was changing the story around me. The county deed led me to a private trust recorded after Ruth's death. It reserved the orchard for David Quinn's biological daughter. Control became irrevocable when that daughter turned 37. My birthday was 6 weeks away. Until then, Dad could manage the property but could not defeat my interest without a signed beneficiary disclaimer, the document Andrew placed beside my missing plate. Would you have confronted the family now, or waited until every lie connected? Tell me what you would do, and subscribe to Before She Spoke Stories. The developer's contract contained a deadline hidden inside the legal description. If my disclaimer was signed before my 37th birthday, the orchard could be sold without future challenge. After that date, my interest would harden and the buyer would need my consent. Thanksgiving was not chosen for family symbolism. It was the last holiday before their window closed. Rebecca requested her adoption records from Ohio. Her sealed file identified her birth mother only as EQ 17 from Pennsylvania. Elaine's maiden name was Quinley. The maternity home was St. Agnes, the same name written on the photograph. Rebecca read the initials 3 times, then whispered. She found me as an adult, and still introduced herself as someone else. Rebecca's adoptive records referenced a separate trust created by her maternal grandfather for any child Elaine had before marriage. It was intended for education and housing once that child was located. Annual statements stopped shortly after I was born. The money had not disappeared. It had been redirected into an account controlled by Elaine under Rebecca's childhood initials. I traced orchard lease deposits that should have remained inside Ruth's trust. Large transfers matched Andrew's restaurant renovation and the down payment on his house. Rebecca found payments from her grandfather's trust entering the same family account. Andrew's success had been built with money belonging separately to both of us. He had inherited nothing. He had simply been given access. Andrew called me that evening and offered enough money to cover my mortgage if I stopped confusing Rebecca. I let him talk. He insisted Mom and Dad were trying to protect everyone. Then his voice tightened and he said, "Mom already sacrificed one daughter. Don't make her lose everything over the other." I saved the voicemail. Rebecca looked at me and said, "He knows exactly who I am." St. Agnes had closed years earlier, but Rebecca located Helen Price, a retired caseworker who had worked there in 1987. Helen remembered Elaine because Elaine's father arrived with an attorney and demanded complete secrecy. She had preserved duplicate intake records after several pages were replaced. Those copies identified Elaine as Rebecca's mother and stated that David Quinn had no involvement in the birth. Rebecca, Andrew, and I completed accredited relationship testing through a laboratory approved for court use. Andrew cooperated because he believed the results would prove Rebecca was Dad's child and pressure me to surrender the orchard. Instead, The preliminary analysis showed Rebecca and Andrew shared a mother. My results connected me biologically to both Elaine and David. Our parents had reversed the only relationship that could be tested clearly. Aunt Judith produced an old statement claiming Elaine had only volunteered at St. Agnes and was photographed holding another girl's baby. It looked official until I checked Judith's notary commission. It had expired 3 weeks before the stated signing date. The seal number belonged to her renewed commission, issued 2 months later. She had created an old document with credentials that did not yet exist. Dad filed an emergency petition asking the court to approve the orchard sale without my consent. He called me an unrelated adult exploiting family confusion and claimed the developer would withdraw within 48 hours. Elaine circulated the petition among relatives before I received it. By dinner, cousins were messaging me about greed. Their story had reached the family before my evidence reached the judge. My advantage was not money or influence. It was knowing which document could stop a closing before a courtroom decided everything. I sent the title insurer Ruth's trust, my certified birth record, the disputed disclaimer, and formal notice of a beneficial interest conflict. The insurer suspended coverage pending review. Without clean title insurance, the developer could not safely complete the purchase, even if Dad signed. The next morning, Rebecca called Elaine and apologized. She said I had frightened her with theories and that she wanted to return home, sign the trust release, and finally become part of the family. Elaine welcomed her immediately. Within an hour, Mom told relatives Rebecca had escaped my manipulation. By afternoon, Rebecca was sitting at my old place while Andrew prepared 2 separate surrender documents. Rebecca insisted the signing be recorded because she no longer trusted verbal promises. Andrew arranged a remote notary session and sent everyone the consent notice. Elaine, David, Andrew, and Rebecca each confirmed on camera that the meeting could be preserved. They believed the recording protected them from Rebecca changing her mind. What it actually preserved was every answer they gave when she asked what each woman would lose. Rebecca pointed to my orchard disclaimer and asked, "Once Mara signs, she receives nothing from David's land?" Elaine answered, "Correct." Rebecca then lifted her own release. "And this removes me from Grandpa Quinley's trust?" Andrew said it was necessary to keep the assets together. When Rebecca asked where together meant, Dad answered impatiently, "With Andrew. He is the only one who can manage any of it." Rebecca looked directly at Elaine. "Before I sign, I need David to say he is my biological father." Silence stretched across the recorded call. Dad finally said, "Biology is not the important part." Rebecca asked again. Elaine reached toward the laptop as if she might close it. Then Andrew said, "Mom, just tell her enough." Dad snapped, "Do not explain what happened before Mara was born." Rebecca's voice shook, but she stayed seated. "Then say the agreement clearly. Who keeps what?" Elaine looked at Andrew and answered, "Mara gets nothing from David's orchard. You get nothing from my father's trust. Andrew keeps both. That was always the agreement." Then she added the sentence that connected every altered record, every stolen payment, and every lie. The girls were never supposed to compare histories. Rebecca ended the recording and sent it to me. At the emergency hearing, Dad testified that I was an adopted woman trying to seize land reserved for blood relatives. Elaine claimed Rebecca was Dad's biological daughter and had willingly transferred her rights to Andrew. Their attorney displayed Judith's affidavit and called our objections emotional speculation. Then my lawyer asked whether they wanted the court to rely on biology. Dad answered, "Absolutely." That answer opened the door we needed. The accredited laboratory report appeared on the courtroom monitor. David was my biological father. Elaine was my biological mother. Elaine was also Rebecca's biological mother. David had no biological relationship to Rebecca. Andrew shared Elaine with both of us. Rebecca and I were not rivals connected through Dad. We were maternal half-sisters, separated by one mother who had built opposite lies around us. Helen Price testified by video from Ohio. She identified Elaine's St. Agnes intake form, Rebecca's birth record, and the duplicate pages she preserved after Elaine's father demanded alterations. The original file listed Elaine as the 17-year-old mother and stated that the father's identity was unconfirmed. David's name appeared nowhere. Elaine stared at Helen as though an old locked room had suddenly opened in public. Rebecca's recorded family meeting played next. Every participant had consented to the recording. The courtroom heard Elaine say that I would receive nothing from David's orchard. Rebecca would receive nothing from her grandfather's trust, and Andrew would keep both. Then came the sentence that ended every claim of misunderstanding. The girls were never supposed to compare histories. Elaine closed her eyes. Andrew looked toward the exit. The title insurer's representative confirmed that coverage had been suspended because Ruth's trust created a disputed beneficial interest. Without insurance, the developer would not close. The judge denied Dad's emergency request and barred any transfer of the orchard pending a complete trust accounting. 48 hours earlier, my parents believed the sale was inevitable. Now even their buyer wanted written distance from them. My lawyer placed Judith's commission dates beside her affidavit. The notary seal used on the document did not exist when the statement was supposedly signed. Judith admitted Elaine asked her to correct the family record, but claimed she never understood the inheritance plan. The judge referred the notarization for investigation and ordered Judith to preserve every journal, stamp record, email, and draft connected to our identities. The independent accounting traced orchard income and Rebecca's trust distributions into accounts used for Andrew's restaurant, house, and personal debts. Andrew insisted our parents handled the transfers. Then my saved voicemail played. Mom already sacrificed one daughter. Don't make her lose everything over the other. He had avoided learning every detail, but he knew enough to profit, and enough to keep us separated. Elaine and David were removed from financial control of both trusts while investigators reviewed the transfers. Rebecca was recognized as a potential beneficiary of her grandfather's trust, and my interest in Ruth's orchard remained intact. Recovery would take years, not one dramatic check. Some funds were gone, others were tied up in Andrew's property and business. This time, however, every dollar had to be explained. Did Rebecca and I go too far by exposing the entire family at once, or was that the only way to stop them? Tell me in the comments and subscribe to Before She Spoke Stories. We could have demanded the immediate sale of Andrew's house, but his children had not stolen from us. Rebecca and I accepted a court-supervised lien and structured repayment instead. I told Andrew, "Your children will not lose their home because our parents took ours, but you will repay what you knowingly accepted." Accountability did not require us to repeat the cruelty that created us. Ruth's safe deposit box held her final letter and the missing album pages. She had confronted Elaine years earlier and demanded both daughters be told the truth. David persuaded her to stay silent to protect Andrew's future. Ruth wrote to Rebecca and me, "You were never rivals. You were daughters kept apart by people who needed each of you to believe the other had taken her place." Weeks later, Rebecca helped me restore the album. She placed our Thanksgiving name cards side by side and asked, "Which seat was supposed to be mine?" I answered, "They had room for both of us. They just needed us to believe there wasn't."